Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our sixth YouthLead webinar of the Cohort 3. I am Efrem Bekele, an Atlas Core Fellow and a Youth Engagement Fellow for the Youth Powers to Learning and Evaluation Project at Making Sense International. Three of my colleagues and two of our YouthLead ambassadors have joined me for today's webinar. And before we get started, a few housekeeping instructions to please mute yourself when you are not speaking. And if also you have any technical issue, please contact Gloria. Gloria is on the call right now. And also feel free to post your questions in the chat box at any time of the webinar, and we get back to the question and answer session for our today's speakers. And this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on youthlead.org later this week. And also we ask to help share the information or the webinar widely on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram using hashtag YouthLead global, and hashtag YL webinar. We are available on all social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at YouthLead Global. So today's webinar will be focusing on child marriage and how our YouthLead ambassadors are combating it through an effective youth advocacy program. So child marriage is a social cultural challenge which has persisted as a traditional practice in local communities in both sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And the localized practice of child marriage is typically driven by societal norms, religious beliefs, and cultural endorsement of the practice. And effective family planning and reproductive health using a youth advocacy programming has been identified as a very effective method of assisting local communities in order to eradicate child marriage and also bring a societal norm surrounding this practice. So today, two of our YouthLead ambassadors, Nyasha and Chiranthi, will discuss their unique perspectives from sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia on how effective youth advocacy can be a family planning and reproductive health rights education is being used to combat the practice of child marriage. Next slide, please. So on today's agenda, we have 60 minutes, and we'll start by introducing our team members. Then I will talk about our YouthLead ambassadors and also the program. Then Sarah will be talking about a little bit about YP2LE and the PYD program. Next, our speakers will begin by giving insights on child marriage and also problem analysis from those two continents. And finally, also their best practice in their respective countries. So once we finish the presentation, we'll go to a question and answer session. And also I'll come back again for a closing session where I'll be talking about the YouthLead side and also the next webinars. With that, I'll give it to my colleague, Sarah, to introduce our team. Thank you.
Thanks, Efrem. And good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. It's a real pleasure to be here with our YouthLead ambassadors for their webinar. I'm going to share a little bit more about YP2LE, but before I do, we just wanted to highlight our team here at Making Sense under Youth Power 2. So you can have a sense of who we are and what we do. And, you know, we have Cole and Gloria and Efrem and myself in the room this morning, but we are backed by a full team of staff who have technical expertise in youth development, youth engagement, communications, advocacy. So I hope you'll get to know our team. And if you'd like to learn more about YouthLead, you can also visit youthlead.org, and Efrem will share a little bit more about the platform in a moment. Before we dive in, I just want to give you some background about Youth Power 2 in case you're not familiar with what that is. Youth Power 2 Learning and Evaluation, or YP2LE for short, is supported by USAID, and it's a funding mechanism for youth-focused programs. That means it's a source for funding, research, and programs focused specifically on positive youth development, PYD. If you're not familiar with PYD, this is a holistic framework that really focuses on youth as assets. It assumes that all young people have assets that should be invested in through inclusion, access, education, and training. And the framework also promotes youth agency. That means that we think youth can best be supported by an enabling environment for young people, such as strong youth networks, supportive adults, youth-friendly services and resources, and youth-friendly policies. And the image on the screen is really just meant to help us understand how this project is structured. We have our overarching YP2LE and Youth Power funding mechanism. And then we have our two platforms. We have youthpower.org, which is really for international youth implementers and programs that are focused on youth serving organizations. And then we have youthlead.org. And this platform is really for young change makers, young people who are working for positive change in their community, who are young social impact entrepreneurs. And the platform includes a range of resources, information, ways to network and connect. So I will turn it to Ephraim to say more about youthlead.org, but we encourage you to learn more about YP2LE, and we thank you for joining us here today. Ephraim, back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So just like Sarah mentioned about YouthLead, YouthLead.org was launched at the 2018 World Bank Youth Summit. And today we have more than 12,000 members from around the world. And this platform is a global hub for young people aged between 15 and 35 who are working for positive change and impact in their communities as advocates, activists, volunteers, and so on. So this site is available for everyone. You can just go ahead to youthlead.org. Cole will help me to drop the link to the chat box. So this, once you go to the site, then you'll be asked to create your own profile, personal profile. Then it will take a maximum of 2 days or 48 hours to get accepted. Then once you're accepted, then you'll have access to different resources from other members. And also it's very open for you to network with other peers, peer in your circle in youth lead areas. And also we have other section which is called discussion group. You can go to discussion groups and talk about social issues that you really care. And also you'll have an opportunity to get a newsletter, which will be sending opportunities of funding, opportunities of accessing materials, and bring a discussion to the platform. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned some of the things that we offer. The first one is connection to a similar network. Second one, we have resources. We have like thousands of resources on the website, which are free for you to access. It comes with different versions. And also you can get more visibility for your projects by just building your profile and also by adding more texts about your profile on your profile related to your project. You can add pictures, other links to your profile also. And also we have thousands of other funding sources. We at the YouthLead, we don't directly provide funding opportunity, but we bring other funding opportunities to the site, to the website. So there's a funding section when you go to the website, so you can access these funding opportunities also. So later on, I'll be back with on the functionality of the website. Next slide, please. So this picture that you are seeing on the screen right now consists of the current YouthLead ambassadors. I've mentioned that this is the Cohort 3 of the YouthLead Ambassador Program. They have represented more than 20 countries from different parts of the world: Africa, Asia, South and Central America, Eurasia, Eastern Europe, and other parts of the world. So for this specific current third cohort program, around 3,000 young change makers applied to be a YouthLead ambassador, and we've selected 22 young change makers as a YouthLead ambassadors. So these YouthLead ambassadors are amazing leaders in their countries. They work with local communities, they work on international level also, and their main task is to share information about YouthLead, which consists of networking opportunity, funding opportunity, and other resources. So they engage other young people in their community, in their circle, and also they bring ideas to the discussion group, to the social media, and also they bring their experience in a platform like today. So for this webinar, Today, we are joined by Chiranthi from Sri Lanka and Nyasha Freeman from Zimbabwe. I'll give you a small introduction about them, then we go to the presentation. So Chiranthi is from Sri Lanka. She's a member of our current YouthLead ambassador team. She is a youth empowerment advocate who specializes in the niche area of youth empowerment incubation, or YEI. Chiranthi is the founder and president of HYPE Sri Lanka, which is the country's first youth empowerment incubator. Additionally, she is a founding president of the Young Legal Professionals Association of Sri Lanka and appointed as the United Nations Youth Delegate for Sri Lanka in 2016. So in her professional career, Chiranthi is an attorney at law and completed her LLB at the University of London and her BA specializing in development policy and management economics at the University of Colombo. She is also a Chevening Scholar 2020 and beginning her master's in international economic law, justice and development at University of London. Our second speaker is Nyasha Freeman from Zimbabwe. He is also one of our members of the current YouthLead ambassador team. He is a peace building practitioner whose work is mainly focused on building vibrant open youth societies. He has been working with vulnerable communities in Malawi, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe. Nyasha thrives when contributing to establishment of youth-led solutions to Africa's prevailing challenges and focusing on disaster mitigation and reduction, peace building, preventing violent extremism, and counter-radicalism. Currently, he is a part of the We Wanana Foundation Coalition, which is a non-profit, non-partisan, non-governmental organization working to support and strengthen democratic institutions in Eastern Malawi and Northern Mozambique through citizen participation, accountability, and prevention of violent extremism. So welcome our speakers. I'm really delighted to be here on today's webinar. And also I invite you to start your webinar, and I invite everyone to enjoy this webinar. Thank you. I'll give it to Nyasha.
Ephraim, for a brief and very informative introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I find you well. I would wish to welcome you to our webinar today with my partner here, Chiranthi. I hope you find it informative and well vested with lots of information that will give you a quite an insight into the the prevalence and also the state of child marriages from the perspective of sub-Saharan Africa and the subcontinent, specifically on Sri Lanka. Okay, we would like to start on overview of child marriages. I would like to define and also misconcept the issue of child marriages, demystifying the myth and also stating the facts. Child marriages, it's not only young boys below the age of 18 that forced into marriage. As we are forced to think, by societal stereotypes that only points to child marriages being young girls forced into marriages below the age of 18. And there's another myth that says child marriages of parties below the age of 18 have consent and have support for the community, but actually it is enough for one party to be below the age of 18 to term it a child marriage exercise. There's a myth that says if children do consent, then there's no problem with the marriage, and such a union cannot be considered as child marriage. Well, the fact is the legal age of majority, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Botswana, Mozambique is normally 18 years of age. And some countries do stretch to 21 depending on the consensual issues and the circumstances. Hence, the legal age of marriage is the one that depicts a relationship or an act of marriage as influencing a child, bridal status, or it's a legal marriage, process and procedure. Okay, next slide, please. So we check on the overview of child marriages. It's so said that over 12 million young girls are married before the age of 18 worldwide. And the key driver to child marriage has been found to be, inequitable gender norms and, adolescent pregnancy. This mainly has worsened under the COVID-19 pandemic, where we find, most young people out of school and with limited options to continue online. Most of the sub-Saharan African countries are too poor and poorly governed to the extent that they can't raise enough adequate online tools and resources to ensure that children do stay in school, even in the midst of government-induced lockdowns and restrictive measures to combat the COVID-19 pandemic. Hence, it is within this regard that the situation has been deteriorating and causing a severe situation that depicts the educational systems across sub-Saharan Africa as of chronic failure to safeguard child rights and also to ensure that there is continued access to education and equitable distribution of resources under the current circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic. So hence it is within this this new normal that has been brought about by the pandemic that we find child marriage is thriving and lots of girls being forced into marriages either through societal and community norms, religious acts, or for the families in order to survive under these harshly arranged lockdown circumstances, have to fend for themselves, and hence they tend to their child to provide and supplement family income during the pandemic. Next slide, please. So now we need to understand, these ground realities in sub-Saharan Africa and, South Asia, analyzing, the challenge of child marriages. Next slide, please. So, like I highlighted earlier, we have got a very great challenge, in sub-Saharan Africa. Child marriages have grown 10% higher during the pandemic, and this is quite worrisome. And Niger, it does top the list, was being followed by Chad, Guinea, Mali, Nigeria. Chad, the average age of young women do find themselves being mothers is 19.2, followed by Mozambique. And, my worry with Mozambique is sometimes these figures are, overwhelmingly underreported. Hence, it might be actually worse than that because, with my research and my work, I've traveled the length and breadth of the country, and I've seen, communities and, cultural sects that do, equally harmful practices like female genital mutilation in preparation for, these young girls for early marriages. And, some typical cases where the girl child is sent away from home for refusing an arranged marriage. And this has been on the growth under the pandemic. Next slide, please. So almost like around 41% of girls are married before reaching the age of 18. And this is so sad, given how we have recorded significant progress and how the girl child, has, placed their footprint on the, developmental map, either as, leaders of industry or as, various drivers of change as the world enters the fourth industrial revolution. And hence Africa is being deprived of, these ideal contributors to the continent's development. Yeah, most of these child marriages, do take place due to, the poverty levels in the communities, where, like I highlighted earlier, communities do leverage their survival on their girl child and also to clear their financial burdens. Hence, it is within this aspect that, girls do find themselves being forced into these early marriages. Next slide, please. So the biggest challenge that, marriages is an exceptionally respected tradition within the African, cultural setup, due to their deeply rooted appreciation for, the notion of family, and also the deeply entrenched patriarchal systems, that see and view women as tools or objects of financial, gain in the communities. And many African communities believe child marriage is primarily about procreation and providing for children, as this is seen as a foundation of the society. Hence, they take women as tokens who should support the male members of the societies who are deemed as the heir apparent, and also, those ones who continue with the lineage legacy, as per African culture. Next slide, please. Hence, I hand this to Chiranthi to explore the perspective of South Asia.
Thank you so much, Nyasha, for giving us an overview of what child marriage is and the ground realities in sub-Saharan Africa. I will be speaking to you about the problem of child marriage as it exists in South Asia. So the facts and statistics show us that in South Asia, child marriage is a pressing problem, because South Asia accounts for almost half of the child marriages which actually occur globally. Whilst child marriage actually affects both the boy and the girl child, what we see is young girls are more vulnerable and more susceptible to this practice. For example, the UNICEF reports, if you actually go through them, starting from 2009, what we actually see is the fact that close to 45% of young girls who are between the ages of 20 and 24 years report that they have been married off. That could be with their consent, as we know that if you are not of the age of the majority, your consent is not considered to be legal consent, but they're either married off or have married before the age of 18 years. Next slide, please. So what we see is that if you take a look at the occurrence of child marriage in South Asia as a region, it is not uniform and it depends from country to country. For example, in Bangladesh, close to 66% of the child population is actually recorded as being child brides or child grooms, while in Afghanistan and India, it's close to 46%, and in Nepal, it's 41%. So this shows us that child marriage and its occurrence really differs from country to country, and it also is dependent on the age bracket as well. But if you see, a lot of the statistics that are available to us are from 2011. So 2011 is the most recent statistics that we have. So this also shows us that there is a lack of perhaps surveying, and there is an underreporting of child marriage in South Asia, which also contributes to the lack of coordinated policymaking as well as grassroots level initiatives combating child marriage. Next slide, please. So if you take a look at the causes of child marriage, now that we know that child marriage is a pressing problem in South Asia, what we see is that there are different socioeconomic as well as cultural reasons that contribute to child marriage. I've actually shared here 5 such reasons. The first reason is the idea of chastity and sexual purity, where families and communities believe that in order to protect a girl child's chastity and sexuality, they have to actually be married off at an early age. Then the second reason is gender inequality that exists in terms of access to education and employment. A common conception in most rural communities in South Asia is the fact that the breadwinner should be the male of a family, and the caretaker and the domestic role should be served by the female. So this actually contributes to gender inequality in terms of access to education and employment. The third reason is the fact, which Nyasha also mentioned, and this reason is a cause for child marriage in South Asia as well. The concept of dowries, where when you actually give your child away, especially the girl child as a child bride, the family that is receiving the child bride is actually required to provide a dowry, and it's often financial, which helps with clearing off the debt and alleviating the girl child's family from poverty. The fourth reason is the weak enforcement of child marriage prohibition laws. So what is interesting about South Asia is that majority of the countries, almost all actually of the countries, have general laws which prohibit child marriage by setting a minimum age of marriage as 18 years. However, what we see is that child marriage is, despite this, practiced in communities, which shows us that it's not a problem of a lack of laws, it's really a problem of whether or not such laws are being enforced. Then the fifth reason is the certain instabilities that are caused by natural disasters or man-made disasters or even human conflict, where when a community is vulnerable, it also sort of has a domino effect and even results in child marriage. So which also shows us how intersectional these practices are and how one thing is dependent on the other. Next slide, please. So now that we have actually discussed what child marriage is and the problem of child marriage in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia as 2 regions, I would like to explore different avenues of effective reproductive health right youth advocacy and family planning services as a tool to combat child marriage as a community level socio-cultural practice. Next slide, please. So you may be wondering why we're talking about reproductive health rights and family planning services together with child marriage. Those are 3 separate areas. So firstly, before talking about the nexus between the connection amongst these 3 areas, let me first talk about what we mean by reproductive health rights. So reproductive health rights is actually a group of universal human rights, where which talks about the importance of giving the right to choice and bodily autonomy, that's bodily control, to individuals over their reproduction and their parenthood. So that's where you can actually control whether or not you are a parent, the frequency of your pregnancy and the number of offspring, etc. And you have complete control over exercising these rights. Then if you take a look at family planning services, those services are necessary to actually protect your reproductive health rights, because if you take a look at the definition of family planning services that's provided by a review of the HHS family planning program, what we see is family planning services are defined as services that are provided to persons to control their ability to anticipate and attain their desired number of children and the spacing and timing of their births. It is achieved through use of contraceptive methods and the treatment of involuntary infertility. So I read this definition out because I think it's very important to actually recognize that family planning services are services that are essential to provide for and protect the reproductive health rights of a community. And there is often certain misconceptions on what family planning services are. For example, especially in South Asia, sometimes family planning services are looked upon as a negative light, where there are even misconceptions where they say that it is perhaps a foreign practice that is brought to us to artificially control our population. So there are misconceptions. So I think it's important to recognize that family planning services are essential to protect one's reproductive health rights. Next slide, please. So now that we have understood what reproductive health rights and family planning services are, let's talk about how they relate to child marriage. If you take a look at child brides and child grooms, especially child brides, young girls who are given away in marriage below the age of 18, we see that such young girls or children in general who are victims of child marriage, they face enormous pressure from their families, their relatives, as well as their communities to prove that they're fertile, to prove that they have the ability to be parents. And often they have to undergo this pressure without proper access to family planning services. So that is why we see that reproductive health rights and family planning services, both of those aspects are crucial in terms of responsive advocacy, where you actually respond to or perhaps give the proper systems to victims of child marriage. And they're also important even in combating and preventing child marriage. See, when we take the practice of child marriage, we see that child marriage often results in unplanned and early pregnancies, even unwanted childbearing and carrying responsibilities, and high maternal mortality rates. In South Asia, child marriage is a main cause of maternal mortality. So, for example, if you take a look at an example, the UNICEF 2009 study actually shows us that teenage mothers between the age of 15 and 19 years are twice as likely to die during childbirth than those of the 20 to 24-year age bracket. That shows us the effects of child marriage, where a person who actually marries below the age of 18 is far more likely to die during childbirth than someone who is above the age of 20. So we see that child marriage as a practice actually violates the reproductive health rights of children, and because they're often forced into marriage, and then after marriage, they're forced into being mothers and fathers at a very young age. So that is a nexus between these three concepts. Next slide, please. So if you take a look at how really we can actually use youth advocacy on reproductive health rights and the promotion of family planning services to combat child marriage, what we see is that youth advocacy is a very strong civil society force against child marriage for two reasons. The first reason is that youth between the ages of 15 and 18 years are a population group that are actually affected by child marriage. And the second reason is the number of active and passionate young people in a country, like many who have joined today or who are joining in through Facebook Live. They are often a formidable force. They are a force to reckon with in terms of bringing about social change. So considering the importance of youth advocacy as an important civil society force, young people can proactively advocate against child marriage in two main ways. The first way is by promoting greater access to family planning services to adolescents. And the second way is by protecting the reproductive health rights of adolescents. Next slide, please. So if we take a look at the different avenues of how we can effectively, as young people, engage in advocacy against child marriage, there are 4 main ways in which we can do that. The first way is what we call macro-advocacy. The second way is micro-advocacy. The third way is preventive advocacy. And the fourth way is responsive advocacy. These are all quite complex development concepts, but I will actually, through examples, prove to you how different dimensions of youth advocacy are important to combat child marriage. Next slide, please. If we take a look at macro advocacy, that actually refers to advocacy efforts which are adopted at an apex or top level, at a systematic level, and it relates often to creating policies, creating and adopting laws, and even national level governance on efforts against child marriage. So I've shared here an example of a project that was done in Sri Lanka by the Sisterhood Initiative, as well as the Muslim Person Law Reforms Action Group. So both these parties together actually connected the different stakeholders in the area of changing the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act in Sri Lanka, and actually organized different stakeholder discussions to output policy papers, as well as to actually output a request to the government to reform the MMDA in Sri Lanka, because the MMDA in Sri Lanka does not specify a minimum age of marriage, which often actually results in the practice of child marriage at a community level. And apart from this, a few other examples of macro advocacy are lobbying with the relevant government ministries and departments and line agencies to actually implement recommendations. Another example of macro advocacy is where you present model policies and even model working papers on different acts that the government can actually adopt to combat child marriage or to protect the reproductive health rights of the population. So as you can see, macro advocacy looks at the overall system and how we can make the system work better. Next slide, please. Then comes the next stage of advocacy, which is micro-advocacy. And micro-advocacy refers to initiatives we take close to our homes, in our communities, in our schools. So an example of micro-advocacy is shared here. This is actually by Shanti Magam, which gives which operates over the phone counseling services for children, and they even have counseling camps for young children in Sri Lanka, especially at a grassroots level. So what we see is that that's an example of micro-advocacy, where you go to the communities and try to create change from a bottom-up approach. So apart from this, 2 other examples of micro-advocacy are organizing comprehensive sexuality education seminars in schools, and also carrying out, let's say, social media awareness campaigns in the local languages on different family planning services that are available to children who face the threat of child marriage. So as you can see, micro-advocacy takes place close to the home. Next slide, please. Then we have preventive advocacy. So preventive advocacy refers to the advocacy efforts that we can take as a prevention of child marriage, that is before the marriage itself takes place. I would like to share 3 main examples of preventive advocacy. So the first one is where you can have town hall conversations in your local village setting on the devastating implications of child marriage. Another thing that we can do is we can lobby with our religious leaders, because in communities in South Asia, child marriage is often a religious practice and a socio-cultural practice. So we can lobby with the religious leaders to discourage child marriage as a practice in the community. And another example could be perhaps getting young advocates and young change makers together and presenting a youth public proposal on countering child marriage to the relevant government agencies. Next slide, please. Firstly, I have to apologize. I think there's some construction going on next door. So if you do hear any background noise, I'm so sorry. So in terms of responsive advocacy refers to advocacy that we take once child marriage has taken place in response to the act. So it occurs as a post-child marriage advocacy effort. So I've shared here an example of a responsive advocacy effort taken by the Family Planning Association in Sri Lanka, which is a leading non-governmental organization that gives free family planning services and counseling at a grassroots level. So apart from that, another example could be where you give legal assistance to children who want to actually divorce their partners that were, in marriages which are child marriages. And it could also be where you arrange different couples counseling sessions, especially for where child marriages where both partners are below the age of 18, where you have couples counseling and family planning services provided to them on leading a fulfilling marriage life, or it could be on the psychological and reproductive dimensions of their relationship. So that's an example of what we can do once child marriage has taken place. Next slide, please. So now it's important for us to share some of the work we do and some of the work that takes place at a community level so that we can see how all the theories we spoke about before can be implemented practically. Next slide, please. So for this, I will hand over the floor to Nyasha.
Thank you so much, Chiranthi, for such a very informative, session, and how you explored how the Eastern Asian scenarios quite diverge from those ones in the sub-Saharan. Okay, so let me go ahead with the exploration of what has been done, in order to alleviate the situation and to bring about change on the sub-Saharan African landscape. Young people of sub-Saharan Africa do come together to create a platform under the UNION-UNICEF advocacy platform. And they eventually won the Reimagine in Africa Without Child Marriage campaign that was held in 2020. Their thrust mainly resides around SDG 5, 10, and 16. SDG 5 being on the aspirations to have an equitable, gender equitable communities across Africa, and SDG 10 that focus on inclusion, and also SDG 16 that also mainly is thrust on peace and security building across the continent. Next slide, please. Okay, so under the platform, they have come up with various, innovative approaches to, demystify these gender-related stereotypes and patriarchal that have been promoting, female genital mutilation and child marriages. And, these were aimed at strengthening youth capacity to ensure that FGM and child marriages are eradicated. And this was being done in a participatory approach that is placing at the center stage the role of young people to be active drivers of change within their respective communities, rather than a tokenist approach where young people are taken aboard in order to satisfy the age gaps. Hence, this creatively created a unique intergenerational dialogue platform that ensures that this always prevalent gap is closed. And this particular initiative did run for 3 months in 2021, and is still ongoing as young people do come up with various artifacts to advocate against this scourge. Next slide, please. So here we move on to showcase a video that illustrated how power has got the art to convey a strong message, to convey a strong meaning to the communities in order to demystify deep-rooted religious and communal beliefs that drive child marriages. You can listen to the atmosphere and how the rhythmic clapping of hands and cheering does, give a very unique manner in which the advocacy message is unpegged to the community without directly confronting these, deeply entrenched societal norms. Okay, so I do put this part through to my partner to, do highlight the work that has been done in, in South Asia and, the unique innovative approaches that have been taken in order to address this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. So I think Nyasha's examples are perfect in terms of explaining how engaging with the community is effective in terms of combating child marriage. The examples I will share will be brief because of the lack of time as well. And most of it will focus on macro-advocacy and the movements that took place at a policy level to bring about change in terms of the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act, and also to actually to further lobby for the protection of reproductive health rights. So in terms of the first example of movements I would like to share is civil society movements for reforming the MMDA of Sri Lanka. And what is amazing about these civil society movements is the fact that they were movements that sprung from the community that was affected by this act itself. And there were several protests that were organized, of which I was also a part of, and several petitions that was presented to the Sri Lankan government requesting for the 70-year-old act to be amended to introduce a minimum age of marriage. Next slide, please. Then the second example I would like to present is a small but humble effort that we took on the part of HYPE Sri Lanka through our efforts on youth empowerment incubation. So Sri Lanka's last national youth policy was in 2014. And since then, successive governments have not adopted a timely youth policy, which has affected how important the youth cause is to the Sri Lankan government. So because of that, as a first initiative, HYPE Sri Lanka introduced a working paper for a model youth policy for Sri Lanka. And in this working paper, we actually advocated for reserving a separate section on protecting the SRHR, that's sexual, reproductive, and health rights of the youth, and providing them access to appropriate family planning services. Next slide, please. Here is an example of another initiative that took place. So the government actually called for public proposals on various provisions that we can include in a new constitution for the country. That's the third Republican constitution. So we actually gathered youth actors and different stakeholders from the youth empowerment system in the country and put forward a youth public proposal on potential provisions of the third Republican constitution. And in these provisions, we actually requested the government to recognize sexuality and reproduction as a fundamental right of the new constitution of Sri Lanka, because the current 1978 constitution does not guarantee sexuality and reproduction as a fundamental right of the Sri Lankan citizens. Next slide, please. This is the final example I want to share, which is an example of a social media campaign that we organized called the Youth Needs Campaign. So in Sri Lanka, our political actors and our politicians are quite active on social media. So we, on International Youth Day and International Human Rights Day last year, actually got together and held up boards which had different messages to the political leadership of the country, and we tracked their social media accounts, and we told our political leadership, this is what we as the youth actually require from you. And a category of rights that was highlighted during this campaign was actually sexual and reproductive health rights and access to family planning services. Next slide, please.
Well, thank you very much, Chiranthi, and Nyasha Freeman. We've learned a lot today. We wish we had more time to discuss about this topic, but also I believe that you're going to have a Twitter chat by tomorrow, and also you are starting a discussion group about this specific topic on youthlead.org, and I know you are uploading also different resources for our listeners. So thank you very much. And we've seen a high engagement. Thank you, our audience on Facebook also. We have received 3 or 4 questions, and I will directly go to the questions, then come back to you guys. So for Chiranthi, I would forward a question that came from Facebook Live Maroon. It says, can you please distinguish between child marriage and forced marriage? That's the first question. And for Freeman, I would forward 2 questions. The first one is, what's the role of education, especially primary education, in order to address this issue? So the role of education, specifically primary education. And the third question for Freeman, Chiranthi, also feel free to answer this one. It's from Dore, from our Zoom audience. It goes like, how a child marriage is overcome being opposed to a particular culture in which such norms are originated and nurtured. As per E.B. Tyler, no culture is supreme than others. So it's a question of how to challenge the culture that really appreciates child marriage. So I'll give both 2 minutes to answer these questions and have a final thought on this topic. Thank you. Chiranthi, you can start.
Thank you so much, Ephraim. So to answer the first question on what the difference is between forced marriage and child marriage, so I will, I think out of habit, bring a bit of legality into it. So with regards to the practice of child marriage is recognized by UNICEF as a marriage or a union between 2 people where at least one party is below the age of 18 years. I think Nyasha already spoke about the myth that some argue that both parties have to be below the age of 18 years for a union to be child marriage. That is not true. As long as one party is below the age of 18 years, that marriage or union is considered to be child marriage. On the other hand, forced marriage actually can occur in the context of children as well as adults. So if a marriage is forced, that is where you are actually sort of coerced and pressured, or it could be that you are outright forced or threatened into marriage. If it is where the party that is threatened is actually below the age of 18 years, then it will be a child marriage. However, if you are an adult above the age of 18 years and you are coerced or forced or threatened to marry, that would be a forced marriage. And in the context of forced marriage, different legislations, it really depends from country to country. Different legislations have processes by which you can annul, that's basically make invalid the marriage because one party or even both parties have not consented to it and were forced into the marriage. Thank you. Nyasha, over to you.
Chiranthi. So I'll go into the question how marriage is overcome being opposed to a particular culture in which norms are originated and nurtured. Okay, you know what it takes, like when we highlighted the issue of arts against FGM and child marriage. You know what we intend to do is to create a medium through which new sentiments are echoed into the deeply entrenched societal stereotypes. Hence, that medium is acceptable to both the young generation and to the older generation. Hence, it is within this notion that these sentiments can be, presented as art, as child songs, Hence, it is when the community does, associate themselves with such narrations and, such songs that a transformation does take place within the community. And it is a gradual transformation that can be equated to a revolution. It's a dynamic way that new ideas can be fostered into play. And I will go to the second question that, calls on how education, especially primary education, can be utilized to, reduce the likelihood of marrying early. Education drives away ignorance. Hence, the more of both males and females do get exposed to sentiments that echo against these ill practices in the society, there's highly likelihood that new methods and new frontiers are adopted in with regard to how religions and communities do resemble and do carry out their practices in the community. Whilst I would add on secondary education, there's likelihood that it may reduce marrying before 18 or more in many countries due to the issue that as more pressures are brought into play and as more of the countries do support education systems, the more young women do stay in school and pursue their dreams, is the less likelihood that they will marry off early. And studies have shown that this reduces child marriages by 5% in most societies. And with more women occupying positions of authority across the continent and across the world, there's more likelihood that they will lift their fellow girl child out of the predicament of being into arranged marriages and forced marriages. And education is the biggest driver of change in our communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, both. We've seen a huge engagement on social media, on Facebook. A YouthLead family also joined, and audience from Kenya, Ethiopia, Madagascar, Liberia, Zimbabwe, US, Ghana, and Nigeria. People were cheering. And thank you very much for this huge insight into this topic. And also believe that you will continue discussing the topic and also sharing the experiences from South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. So I would really love to say thank you very much again, our speakers. And next up, I'll just take a few minutes to talk about YouthLead and other webinars, other upcoming webinars. Cole, please, next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned before, this is the YouthLead site. So you can see that the youthlead.org is on the screen. Then the first step is to complete your profile. Then we encourage you to to post projects. Then for every project and resource and blogs, you'll get a badge, and this badge will become also a contribution. Then there's a newsletter that comes to your email, and we're available on social medias, Twitter and Facebook at YouthLead Global. Also, we have a new social media tool on Instagram at YouthLead Global, the same link. And through all this process, you will feel like you are in the global hub of young people, young leaders on the youthlead.org. Next slide, please. So we would also like to thank our sponsors and who are promoting our YouthLead to their network by contributing resources, events, and various funding opportunities. And our sponsors are offering their expertise, knowledge on various topics like today, and also you'll hear some of the sponsors in the future. So next slide. I would love to share some of the webinars that we are going to conduct in the next month, June and July. So you can see that this table has the list of webinars that we're going to conduct on topics of entrepreneurship, education, right to education, women's participation, peace building, and also about sustainable agricultural development. So you can see that we have the next week, June 25th, 2 of our ambassadors will join us from Asia and Southern America to talk about the access and rights to education and how to use technology in order to address the issue. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you on the next webinar on June 25th on the topic of education as a human right, insights from Venezuela and India. So please check the events on YouthLead. We have a whole section of events under YouthLead, and also for other webinar announcements. And with that, I would love to say again, thank you very much, our speakers and our audience, and keep the discussion and follow them on the YouthLead site, and stay safe. Bye-bye.